It's live now.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So, hi everyone, good morning, and a very warm welcome to all of you for another exciting YouTube live session. So, those who are connecting first time, they can just subscribe to our channel and go to the live stream section. You can view this stream live, and those who are not who want to view it later on, they can have this video. It will be available in our live section. So, no issues for that. They can view it afterwards as well. So before we start our session, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for joining us today. And my name is Meenakshi, and I am CEO and founder of Sustaina Greens, which is a green tech consulting service provider based in Baroda, Gujarat. And in today's session, we will talk about wildlife and habitat restoration. And we have with us our guest, Mr. Hrishikesh Wagh, who is a wildlife biologist and a research scholar working at Wildlife Research Division at Policy Advocacy Research Center. I will give a brief introduction before starting the session. So, welcome, Mr. Hrishikesh Wagh, and I hope you are the youngest speaker for our session in the series of YouTube live sessions. So, to talk about his achievements, he has done MSc in Environmental Science for Ferguson College in Pune, and he is currently pursuing a course on ecological restoration from BNCA Pune. So, Rishikesh has conducted extensive field surveys in various forest types, and today's session is all about habitat restoration. And he has worked across different variety of terrains, landscapes across central India, western India, and northern India. So therefore, I assure all the viewers that you will receive innovative insights and thought provoking conversations in the next 30 minutes. So welcome, Rishikesh, to this exciting session. So would you like to say anything before we start our discussion?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you so much, ma'am, for inviting me as a speaker. As you mentioned, I'm the youngest one. I take it as a privilege, and I assure you that, of course, we'll discuss this topic in detail and what I've learned from habitat restoration along with my journey in wildlife. So, yes, I'm excited for the session.
Okay. Thank you so much. So let's start the fundamentals for everyone who is watching and is unfamiliar with this sector, as well as those who are professionals into this uh, science, and how habitat restoration is very much important in today's generation, and we should not skip this thing. So, can you tell us about your journey in the field of habitat restoration and how you developed your interest in this field?
Right. So, as you mentioned while introducing me, so I've worked quite some places in central India, in Western Ghats. So, the primary focus back then was wildlife, and I was exploring what I can say, uh, the animals there. And you when you have to understand like how animal functions, you need to have a very good understanding about the habitat, and that is when it started like developing my interest that all right, I'm studying animals, but also I need to understand the habitats very well. And throughout the journey, I also came across that there were a lot of degraded habitats and what can be done for it. So that was always a thing in my mind. And a year ago, I joined my organization called Policy Advocacy Research Center, and I got an opportunity to work on a habitat restoration project. So from designing the project to implementation of the project, the aspects got cleared in front of me, and I got a very brief understanding that how a project can be started and how exactly it impacts. So coming to your question that what is exactly habitat restoration? So habitat restoration is something where you try to implement, or it is a scientific tool through which you try to regenerate the forest and develop a forest in itself. So there are different forest types, so you have to understand those particular forest types, and catering to those, you like restore a habitat. So for example, I'll tell you, if you want to restore a particular habitat in central India, so you need to have a very brief understanding about it. And habitat restoration is all about like creating a
Yes.
forest where human intervention is there. And there are different approaches to it, which we'll discuss later in the session as well.
Thank you for the elaborative answer. I think this will, right now we have very few audience joining us, but later on it will actually give an insight what is habitat restoration. So very nice explanation. So why it is important? I want to know that you have worked in different terrains. So why habitat restoration is important?
Right. Many times we focus on the umbrella species of animals when we are working on animals, and we somewhere get our prism very narrowed on that topic that only animal needs to save. No, that's not the case. For them to sustain their forests, their habitats also need to be sustained. They also needs to be conserved. So, in order to protect these animals, the habitat protection or the habitat restoration is of paramount importance. And once you restore the habitat, of course, everything falls in place. Like the animals will get saved, the ecosystem services will fall in place. We'll get like the benefits from the forest itself. So that is why the habitat restoration is important. It just not addresses like we just plant saplings and we just go away. No, there is a whole ecosystem behind it. It is just a starting phase where we start with the what we can say creating a forest, and later it gets turned into a forest.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation. I think every habitat is different, and and different type of species they can survive according to the habitat. So it's very important to know what type of habitat is and what type of species can survive or sustain in that habitat. So talking to our later questions, the first important thing I want to know, what are the international bodies or national institutes or organizations that overlook the habitat restoration?
Okay. So I'll like to tell you there is a organization called Society of Ecological Restoration. So it is a global body where it overlooks or it just gives a very it basically guides ecosystem restoration practices globally. So it is a body where it provides standard practices of ecological restoration, how a project can be designed, how holistic it can be when you yourself are planning a project. So Society of Ecological Restoration is a global body who overlooks the uh, habitat restoration aspect. And also coming to your question that what are the international principles which consider the habitat restoration. So there are different principles, like habitat restoration covers a lot of different global principles where different governments have agreed upon. So starting from a bond challenge. So initially when bond challenge was undertaken, it was agreed that 350 million hectares of the forest needs to be restored globally. So, that is one of the international principle which gets addressed through habitat restoration. Apart from that, in 2019, if I'm not wrong, there was COP14, which we hosted in India, in Gujarat. So, there was a global pledge addressed in that where 26 million hectares of the forest needs to be restored. So, the international principles and the bodies who overlook the restoration parameters in India, and whatever restoration projects which are executed, they directly or indirectly contribute to these targets.
Okay. Thank you for telling about the international principles. I just want to know, right now you are working with Policy Advocacy Research Center. So what
Right.
kind of work they are doing towards habitat restoration?
Okay. A year ago, we started a project called Coastal Habitat Restoration Project, which is in Vedas. It is in Ratnagiri district of Maharashtra. It's a coastal village. So, a year ago, when we got to visit the field site, of course, there was a need assessment survey which was done. And at that time, we got to know that, the coastal habitat of that particular village is highly degraded, and degraded because of lot of factors where there are like natural factors like the cyclones, because we have recently there was a lot of cyclone activity happening in the west coast of India, and the village in which suffered one of the most severe impacts, that was Vyas village. So understanding the whole perspective, we planned a habitat restoration in Vyas, where we are trying to focus on the littoral woodland and also stabilizing the sand dunes present in Vyas beach. So that is the project where which I am working on currently.
Okay. Moving forward, I want to know how a habitat restoration project can be planned or designed, and what are the factors should be considered while designing.
Okay, so as I mentioned, habitat restoration project, you need to start from scratch. So first things first, you need to do a need assessment. Need assessment is basically visiting a site and understanding that what your objectives will be while doing a restoration project. After that, you have to understand the like the severity of the degradation which has happened at that particular site and understand and comprehend that what exactly needs to be done there. The later step which needs to be done is like identifying the stakeholders, because whenever first two things are done, like you get to know the objectives, then you understand the degree of degradation. The later thing which happens is like you need to know that whose jurisdiction that particular land is, who are the stakeholders for that particular area. So like in India, it's very common that we have three common stakeholders. First is forest department, the second is revenue department, because a lot of the lot of land also is under the jurisdiction of revenue. And apart from that, if you are working on fringes of villages, there is also local bodies like gram panchayat, gram sabhas, which are also involved. So you have to you have to understand the jurisdiction, you have to consult the people on ground to understand that what are exactly the land parameters there, are there any land asset registrations done before. And in order to start your project, you need to get those paperwork cleared off at the first place, because designing and all can be done in a later phase as well. But first things first, you need to get your permissions cleared. Once the permissions are cleared, the later thing happens is like creating a baseline data of that particular area. For example, I'll just give you a brief about, like, let's take a place somewhere near the Gujarat coast, and we are planning a restoration project there. So in order to understand, we have to visit the place, we have to understand the fauna and flora of that particular area, especially flora. And how can that be done? So we can do it by conducting reconnaissance surveys in order to gather the baseline data. Apart from that, also you can gather a lot of data from the secondary research material which is available through papers. So compiling this, and also by visiting different sites, which is called as reference habitats. So I'll just clear a term here. A reference habitat is a place where you look up to that how exactly your restoration site needs to be. So you gather all those parameters from those particular data and the reference sites, and you create your own plan on according to your understandings, that how it can be implemented. After that, we have created a plan. So there is a implementation phase. As I mentioned, once your land asset registrations and all are clear, the implementation phase walks in. So during is you have to take a lot of care while implementing, because lot of areas there is a presence of wild animals, herbivores, cattle. So you need to fence the area, you need to take permissions for that, and later you have to implement. So in implementation
So
there is.
if sorry to interrupt, like permissions are required from stakeholders or from forest department or from other relevant authorities. So
Okay,
what type of
so
permission?
okay, so it depends according to your field site as well. Many areas are completely under the jurisdiction of forest department. So only one stakeholder is present there, that is forest department. So you approach state forest department, the local forest office, and you get your permission sorted. But there are also complex places, like many times there is no transfer of jurisdictions as well between the government departments. Like many times what happens, we think that the forest, it is a forest and it must be under the forest department jurisdiction, but that is not the case. It turns out to be that it is under the revenue department's jurisdiction. Then you have to go meet the local tehsildar and understand that what exactly or what are the areas in his jurisdiction. And also there is another activity in order to get to know what exactly land who belongs to, that is the measuring of the land, which the revenue department provides that facility. Once that is done, you get to know exactly who is having that particular field site. Also, I'd like to tell you from my experience, I got to experience it lately. Many times what happens when you're working on fringes of villages. So it turns out to be that even village do have the jurisdiction because the land is under the jurisdiction of the village commons. And for that, you need to have a no objection clearance, NOC from the local village body, that is Gram Sabha. So it depends on the location as well. So it's not very skeleton. It's very what we can say. It's very situation or site specific, I would say.
So, from your answer, it is very much clear that demarcation of boundaries and in which jurisdiction or stakeholder it is falling, it is the preliminary thing which is required for habitat restoration to start the thing of designing and everything, planning. So, like, what are the approaches you follow for restoring a habitat once you get the jurisdictions clear?
Okay. So once we get our jurisdictions cleared, and once we plan everything accordingly to a research project, so one of the things, there are two different approaches in a habitat restoration. So those approaches are understood after you visit the site and get to know the amount of degradation which has happened to the field site. So first things first, I'll talk about the passive approach. So there are two approaches, passive and active. In passive approach, a natural regeneration technique is used, in which like there is not much of disturbance happened, where you have to only assist. You have to remove the barriers, the small barriers, like some small. There is no proper tree density, but the site is all intact. Like the top layer of the soil is intact. The vegetation is good, but you have to add more. It's basically in natural regeneration, it is more of value addition, which is a passive technique. And in active techniques, you have to take a lot of initiative in terms of what that there are again two bifurcations into active restoration techniques. First is uh, like assisted regeneration. In assisted regeneration, you have to remove the barriers which are stopping the habitat to get it into its native phase. Like there are lot of invasive species present, right? So invasive
Yes.
regulation is done. Then you have to reintroduce some species which cannot travel to the place naturally. So you have to reintroduce those species. Apart from that, you have to even clear some like invasive species. Like there are big trees like eucalyptus casuarinas present. You have to remove them because you know what happens. These invasive trees do disturb the soil compositions, and because of that, the acidity of the soil increases, and the native saplings cannot be sustained in that. So that is what we can do in assisted regeneration. Apart from that, there is different technique called reconstruction. So reconstruction is like that technique is applied to a very degraded site, highly degraded site. For example, the ecosystem was not present there for a very long time just because there was a high infestation of invasives. So what we do is we start from scratch, from removing the invasives to clearing the pits to leveling the pits. You have to start from the base. And when you implement your project there, it is like you have to wait for the first succession, and later the successions happen, and over the period of 10-15 years the site gets into its full glory. So these are the approaches. Like in passive, it is natural regeneration. In active restoration approach, there is assisted and reconstruction techniques which are applied.
Okay. Thank you for detailed explanation about active and passive types of approaches for habitat restoration. So, how do you monitor the success of a restoration project? And can you give some examples of habitat restoration in India? It's a question asked from Pratiksha Chalke. So, I think it will combine the both.
Okay. So first come first, I'll answer to your question that how we assess. So when your implementation phase is done, when you plant the saplings on field, so usually it is done during the onset of monsoons. So what happens, the saplings get quite quite an attention, and it gets nutrition, moisture. There is no much of heat and all, and it grows. Basically, the sapling grows. So, how can we monitor the restoration project? Coming to that question, there are growth parameters which we can assess. So, growth parameters means how much of the plant or the saplings which you have planted over a set time period, how much it has grown. So, for that, you take the GBH, that is growth at breast height, where you measure the diameter of that particular sapling which is grown. Apart from that, you also assess the mortality rate, because you'll get to know exactly that your saplings are surviving. That is where you'll get to know that your project is getting successful. Mortality is there, then disease infestation is there, and once the disease infestation is understood, you get to know that how much of the saplings are survived. Apart from that, one of the best indicators of your restoration project is the reviving of the diversity. So after a set time of period, there is a diversity which these plants attract, because it's an ecosystem. So that cycle starts, and when that cycle starts, you get to know that the project is getting successful over the period of time. But let me tell you, the time period for this particular phase of attaining the succession at later stages, it takes a lot of time, like around 15 to 20 years it takes to understand these impacts. The short growth scale patterns, you understand it quite early. So that is one. Apart from that, there was a question regarding like what is the example of
Examples of habitat restoration in
habitat
India.
restoration in India. So I'll just quote you a classic example. It was done in central India. So there was a problem that tigers were not staying in the forest areas, especially the buffer core areas. And once the root cause, when the researchers started finding the root cause, they were confused that why exactly the tigers are not staying in the core. So it was understood that because of invasive species, the invasive species were very deeply penetrated in the core zone. Because of that, what used to happen, the grazing and browsing species, the herbivores, that is the cheetal, sambar, these herbivores were not able to stay in that particular zones, just because there was infestation of invasives and they were not getting enough fodder. So in order to that, they were moving on the outskirts. So when the prey was moving outskirts, the tiger was following that particular animal, and that's why the tigers were not staying in the core or in their territory. So what was done was, the forest department started taking integrative measures, where they started regulating these invasives, and also there were combing operations. Combing is like, you walk through the forest in a comb pattern, and you clear the invasives which are in your path. So the forest was divided into small quadrants, so small square boxes, and in that a focused activity was done. So what was observed, over the period, these grasses, these native plants were regenerating their well, and which brought the herbivore species back into those particular zones. And eventually, what happened? That tiger also came back. So you see how restoration plays important role. You just intervene on a very small measure, and everything falls in place. So this is one of the classic examples I would tell you.
Okay. Thank you for sharing a very beautiful example of removing the invasive species by doing the combing methodology or approach. So, how does habitat restoration play a role for ecology?
Okay, as I mentioned, like the classic example again, uh, there is lot of infestation of invasives like lantana or the undergrowth which is present in the forests. So what happens, it degrades the habitat, it competes the local species, and it takes over completely. And down the line, about 10-15 years ago, 10-15 years after, the ecosystem collapses. So in order to stop that, what we can do is intervene properly by going there and identifying such places where restoration can be done. So, how can we relate two topics of ecology and restoration together? So, ecology and restoration can be are basically part of same discipline. So, I'll just give you an example that how can we do it. So just we'll understand that there is a site on a Western Ghat, and there are two mountains, and in those two mountains there was a forest earlier, but because of human interventions and invasive infestations, the forest got degraded. So what happened, these two places got separated in terms of animal movement as well. So what can we do as of now is restore those particular corridor pockets, and these corridor pockets can play a very important role for ecology, for animals, migrations, for bird diversity, and it can eventually just streamline everything, I would say. So that is how important it is for uh,
Yes.
ecology.
Yes, I totally agree with your examples. Like safeguarding of these wildlife corridors is prime importance. As we can see, India is a developing country and lots of development, road infrastructure, and everything is going on, but it is negatively impacting the habitats. We are we are disturbing the land use, and because of that, we are losing the species at a very unprecedented rate. So my next question to you is like why there is a need for habitat restoration projects to be planned in new landscape. So if the already landscape is disturbed, so how can we plan a same type of restoration project in a new landscape?
Right, right. So, this new landscape thing is very interesting. I'll tell you why. Because, many times the forests are intact at places, but also there are zones on the fringes of the forests which doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of forest departments. So these are the new landscapes where we can focus. And as you mentioned that there is a lot of imprint of humans in terms of land use patterns. And because of that, as we discussed earlier, the corridors are also separated. So where exactly we can focus? So what are these new areas? So these new areas are the corridors or are the spaces in the fringes of the forests, or those can be even the village commons. Because why these new areas, many times there is lot of big paperwork to be project on the fringe of the forest where the site is a private land or a revenue land. There is not much of a legalities or licensing work to be done, and those are the places where you can easily start a research project or a restoration project. And these particular pockets are very important in terms of connectivity, in terms of improving biodiversity, in terms of even creating a buffer between the forest and villages. Because we have a lot of problem of man animal conflict as well. So in order to that, we can't only rely on forest areas or on forest department. There can be also initiatives taken where there can be a plantation done on the fringes of the forest. A habitat completely can be restored, just in order to safeguard the species as well. And also there are direct indirect benefits for us as well. There are ecosystem services, there are commercial activities which we get benefited, that is the
Ecotourism.
forest produce,
Yes.
ecotourism and all. So these are also the aspects where we can focus in the new areas. And as I mentioned, the big factor here while implementing the project and getting the paperwork done, it's very, very easy. You can do it quite easily as well.
Thank you for introducing the new concept of planning habitat restoration in new landscapes. And before moving to further questions, I would like to tell to audience that if you have any questions, please write it down in the chat box. We can ask our speaker, Rishikesh. So, Rishikesh, coming to you, can you please tell me what kind of projects you are currently working on?
Okay, I'll explain the coastal habitat restoration project in brief now. As I mentioned you, we did a need assessment. So I'll give you a background of the whole project. So back in 2020, we had a lot of, there was a cyclone called Nisarg cyclone, which impacted the west coast. And back about 30-40 years ago, there was plantations done by forest department on the beaches of west coast, especially in Maharashtra. So it was the plantations were of casuarina. it is an invasive species from Australia. So the rationale of planting casuarinas was it will act as a windbreaker, or it will
Yes.
divert the storms, and it will just protect the hinterland communities. But when the cyclone in 2020 hit the Velas village, same the plantation was present. When the cyclone was hit, we got to understand that that is not how exactly casuarinas work. It rather busted our myth. Casuarinas didn't work in that way at all, and rather it created more havoc. Those casuarina barks went into the villages and it created more destruction. So understanding that particular aspect, our colleagues also they brainstormed about that idea, that what exactly can be done, and the idea of coastal habitat restoration emerged. So what exactly we are doing is the species which were present on the literal part of the beach that we are trying to restore, because beach is having three different zones. So
Yes.
if you walk on the beach, you'll get to understand that there is a small slope or a very small sand present there. So it is an incipient dune which changes frequently. Then there is a hind dune. Hind dune is a place where the plantations were done, and hind dune is a place where the habitat was present in a previous days, like back in 50, 60 years ago, of native species. So what we proposed was a native plantation, a scientifically designed native plantation, which restores a habitat. And this not only restores the habitat, but it also caters to the hazards which are coming from the seaward side. So I'll just tell you about the species selection which we done back then. So the species which we selected were also of commercial importance for the villages. We can't just be very like environment centric and go ahead with it. It was also commercial, but also it was those were the species which were present on the beach. And if you understand the arrangement of trees which we did there, so it was in increasing height. So even where when the saline winds or the storm cyclones which will come in future from the seaward side to the hinterland, those cyclones or the strong winds will get diverted. And that was one of the rationales of creating a design like it. And another angle, another social angle for that project was, Vyas village was very famous for its betel nut production. That
Okay.
that is what we call supari. So
Supari. Yes.
that was quite famous, or that was the village was producing a heavy number of betel nuts. But once the cyclone was hit, the vegetation barrier which was present between the sea and village was gone, because the casuarinas did fell away. So because of that, what happened? These saline veins started penetrating in the interiors of the village, and which created a problem of salinity, which impacted the growth of the saplings along with the production of those particular plants. And I'll just quote an example. There was a production. Orchard used to produce about 1 ton of betel nuts. Now after the cyclone, after the salinity infestation, the production has dropped down to 100 kgs. And in coastal communities, this particular type of revenue is quite important, because they don't have any other source of revenue, and the production just dropping to 10% is very impactful for them. So this is what we are doing. It's just not habitat restoration, but we are also looking at the social angle for this particular project. So this is what I'm doing at Park now.
Thank you for explaining your current projects. And as you given the example of Erica nut, I think there are other agroforestry crops that can be introduced in the areas to increase the livelihoods of villagers. Because
Right.
the village community, they are like the actual hardworking people who put their efforts in giving us food and providing us with the best possible food thing, like which are essence of our country. India is like a agriculture country and leading in agriculture sector. So my next question to you is like, it's very interesting to know about habitat restoration, about this discipline, and how students, especially school going students and college going students, they can work for such kind of projects, and what kind of skill set they require for habitat restoration.
Okay. So as you mentioned, habitat restoration is quite a generalist topic. You don't need a very strong background in sciences, or you don't need to be of a particular age. So students can join, of course, by volunteering activities. We at Park also provide a lot of volunteering opportunities, paid volunteering opportunities for the students, where they can come and join for habitat restoration projects.
So,
But
what is the
also about
minimum eligibility? Like which class or which college going? Like, is there any particular thing about eligibility for students to apply for
okay,
volunteership?
okay. So for a full-time volunteer, we'll need a person who's at least appeared for a graduation.
Okay,
Yes, and apart from that, for volunteering, anyone is welcome.
okay. So it's
As you
there is no
mentioned,
age limit. Like if a retired person is there, then he can also join as a volunteer.
yes, of course, he can, of course, because we need a lot of helping hands on ground, because it is
Yes,
quite a labor intensive task, because you have to
exactly.
transport the saplings, you have to plant, you have to pit.
Hmm.
So activities like that are done. So you mentioned about what skill sets are need, or
Yes.
how one can start his own journey in wildlife into habitat restoration. I would like to speak about it as well. As I mentioned about Society of Ecological Restoration, so SER is a global body who also provides courses. So the courses are quite dynamic in nature, where they teach you the principles of ecological restoration. So there is a program called Certified Ecological Practitioners Program. So that is one where you can apply for and learn about the theory part of it, and also get certified to be a habitat practitioner as well. Apart from that, there is a course in Pune. So there is a college called BNCA, Bhanuben Nanavati College of Architecture, which provides a foundation training program, which is a very basic in nature, where they introduce you to the techniques of restoration. And they introduce you techniques of restoration, the current practices, and so that is also a course to journey into habitat restoration. Apart from that, there is a botanical gardens called Oroville Gardens. They also do provide this course of eco restoration. So that can be learned from these three particular places, which do provide a quality course, I would say.
Thank you. Within the similar lines, there is a question in chat box from Isha that is there a job opportunity for MSc botany student? So you have talked about the courses like SER or the courses which are offered in colleges. Like what kind of job opportunities they can look forward?
Okay, so in terms of job opportunities for habitat restoration, there are quite some, because the whole core of the project revolves around plants, and for that MSc botany, I would say it is one of the most relevant uh, people who can join for. So, what all places they can apply? There are lots of NGOs, there are lots of corporate organizations working on planting, habitat restoration. Apart from that, there are also academic institutions who do conduct their own research projects. So, these three places are the scope where they can actually apply for.
Okay. Thank you, Rishikesh. We will take just two more questions. So one is from Arknag that I wanted to ask, how does invasive species is good to the ecosystem? Since there are a lot of experts in this field, plant invasive to attract butterflies and bees. So I think her question is, do invasive species provide any value to the ecosystem, especially in terms of attracting butterflies and bees?
Okay, so of course, uh, it's very specific. Like those are nectaring plants, and nectaring plants can
Yes.
be whatever. It can be native or invasive. So when we'll see in terms of services, or in terms of rightness of the species, then of course the natives will prevail. But of course, the invasives also are not much of harm at a small level, at small scale level, like lots of people do suggest for butterfly gardening. That is where I think the question is coming from. So at those small scale levels it is fine, because of course the objective there is to attract butterflies and bees. But at a large scale level, invasives are not much of advised, because what happens, these are, of course, these are invasive species. They do a lot of harm in terms of uh, soil composition, because the leaves of these invasive species, when they fall off and when they decompose, the soil composition becomes acidic. And what happens because of that, the native saplings are not allowed to grow, or they find it difficult to grow. And if we also, that is one thing, I'll come to another point later. Apart from that, there are a lot of invasives who drain water actually from the water tables. And the areas where the water tables are weak, the invasives are not suggested. And apart from that, if we see, in past era there were very commercial angles for the invasive plantations, like eucalyptus, casuarinas, for logwood, for oil. But now we have passed that stage and we have to think innovatively. We have to think of ecosystem services as well, because these invasive species don't attract much of diversity. It doesn't attract much of
Exactly.
animals, it doesn't attract much of birds neither. So it is quite like, if we compare it in terms of cost benefit ratio, then natives should be planted, invasive should be avoided. And there are a
Exactly.
lot of regulations as well which are coming in place. Like for casuarina, it was mentioned in National Turtle Action Plan specifically that these invasives should be avoided or completely stopped planting.
I agree with you. And there is a, case study held in Pune itself about Gliricidia in the plantation in the industrial green belt, because
Right.
it's a avenue tree, and the single row plantation over a period of 15 to 20 years has altered the soil ecosystem completely, and even it is not allowing the native plants to grow. So it, on a larger scale, it disturbs the ecological balance basically. So coming to our last question, can you give us an idea what is the journal time span for a habitat to be restored? It is asked by Pratiksha.
Okay, so the general time span, it's very subjective, if it is a pilot site, of course, it is going to take a very less number of times to show you a result, because you are doing it rigorously in a very small plot of land. But if you are doing it in a very big landscape, so the time span must be at least about 10 to 15 years, where you want to see the results completely, the transformation results. Or rather, you have to, so even there are succession stages, right? So in primary it is like very basic,
Yes.
in tertiary where the maturity of the ecosystem reaches, so for that at least 15-20 years minimum is needed for that.
Okay. So thank you for telling us the time span. Another question from Isha regarding our previous discussion, that bees and butterflies help in pollination, which will in turn lead to more growth of invasive species. So I guess, would you like to answer this question?
uh,
I think we
in a
have
way,
already
yes.
covered this
Yeah,
in our
she's trying
previous
to make a
topic.
point which I completely agree with.
Yes, 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 yes. So, thank you, Rishikesh, for this enlightening session. And we got to know more information about habitat restoration, how it is done, active approach, passive approach, different types of restoration techniques, what is like a type of new introducing habitat restoration in new landscape, and what are the skills and career opportunities are existing in this field, and what are the international bodies working towards this field, and how can one pursue their career or get more job opportunity in habitat restoration. So thank you audience for joining us, and please subscribe to our channel for having more enlightening sessions in the future. Thank you so much, Rishikesh.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
bye bye everyone.